so tonight, Rebecca's going to come, and she's going to give her testimony. Seeing her has just been an inspiration, so I want her to come share. Y'all give her full attention. Rebecca Masdon.
All right, so I'm Rebecca, like you said, and they got me here to talk to you about testimony. And what a weird word, right? Such a strange word, especially now. How many of you guys use the word testimony in your daily life? If you're honest. Nobody uses the word testimony. It's so strange, isn't it? And so when they asked me to come talk, a little bit about me, I have been now traveling the world sharing my story or my testimony for the last few years. And so when people first started asking me to share my story, y'all, I'll tell you, I've lived a strange life. I've lived a lot of lives. I've lived some chapters of my life that we probably can't talk about here because it's not PG-13. So when people ask me to come share their stories, my story, I'm like, okay, which chapter and how long do we have to share? Because I've lived a big life. But whenever I was preparing for here, when Heather came to me, something that I just thought about was just kind of the simplicity of breaking down what that word even means and what that means to you and why does it even matter, really, right? And so I wanted to talk about what that word even means. So testimony, the original language of testimony, simply just means to witness or just to say what you saw. So if you had a wreck, how many of y'all are driving cars? Okay, so y'all leave out here and God forbid a wreck happens right in front of you. You're not involved, thank goodness, so you don't have to call your mom and you're not in trouble, right, or your dad, but you witness it, right? So then what are you held accountable to do? Someone might ask you to say, right, and be a witness to what you saw at the crime, right? So who hit who was in the wrong, whatever, you're an innocent, bystander, so they want your witness, they want to see, they want to hear what you saw, right? Does that make sense? Yeah? Yes? Say yeah? Yes. Okay, right. So that's what testimony is. All it is just, that's a strange old school word to say, what have you seen in your life? What does your day look like? What do you do? What are you living for? Are you living for the acceptance of your peers that don't know anything better than you know? Or are you living for something bigger to be awakened and be in alignment with the divine? Well, those are two very different lives. And so I wanted to kind of start, before I share my testimony and my story, I wanted to bring up John 9. How many of y'all have heard the song Amazing Grace? Right? Okay, so there's a big famous line in it. Okay, so it talks about the blind man. What's the line? Ready? 1, 2, 3. I once was blind, but now I see. Okay, so that comes from John 9, right? It's a very real story that gave that sentence, that line, that lyric in the song, right? And so it was when a guy, you've probably heard the story, was blind, right? Jesus comes busting up into town, okay? He heals him. Now he can see. And then old boy decides that he can never be the same again. He's got to go share with everybody what this dude Jesus just did. It changed his life. It gave him a testimony. It wrecked his world so much so it set that fire in him, right? That you talked about a second ago. So he had to go share it. Okay? That was not acceptable back then. This guy was your age. A lot of people, when they hear the story, they think he's this old man, but he was a teenager. So he's this blind teenager. He's your age. No one's ever listened to him before. He's been shunned out of community because he can't see. He wasn't educated because, again, bro couldn't see to read, okay, a book. So he's not educated. So he goes before what you would consider here, like the Senate, the church officials, and in that day, the community, if he ticked off some of those people, it wasn't like, bro, you're booted out of our church, and now you can just go up the road and go to, Guntersville First Baptist, go to a different church. No, if they rooted him out, if he did anything to cause any issues, he and his family will be completely excommunicated out of the community. Now, they're homeless. Now, there's no cars, there's no cell phones, there's no TikTok. Like, they're stranded in the desert, trying to figure out where to go next, right? But he just knew after he experienced that experience with the Lord, he had a one-on-one, for real, true encounter. I've been to the place where it's happened. I just got back from Israel. It very much is a real story. He encountered the Lord, experienced a miracle of Jesus, and a miracle of sight. He once was blind, and now he saw, and it changed his life forever. So he could not just hold that into himself, because that's not how Jesus works. That doesn't make sense, right? So he goes before the town and shares this, that Jesus, this guy is the real deal. And, I may not know what you guys all know, because of course, all the big upper guys, all the big shots, the officials, the people in charge, they're all questioning him. They're making this teenager, so imagine you, right? They're making him tell the story over and over again about what Jesus did to him, how he healed him, and probably that he'll stumble on the story or because they're not believing that it's real. And then they start asking the kid about Jesus, like, don't you know he's a sinner? Like, he can't be the Messiah. There's no way he could have had that miraculous ability, right, to heal your vision. And the kid finally just levels up in that boldness, right, and goes before them, and he says, look, I may not have the knowledge that you guys have, I may not have the wealth that you have, I may not have the status, but I have the authority of Jesus Christ. I can tell you, I can't quote you his sins and what he's been doing. All I can tell you is what happened to me. That's his testimony, right? All I can say is what happened to me. I used to be blind, but now I see. I mean, that's epic, right? I mean, imagine not being able to see for your life until right now. You can't imagine. You can't possibly imagine the power of that. But he was bold. He said that to those people. And then they said, Adam, to try to tell a story again. And he said, why do you guys want to hear my story over and over again? What? You want to be his disciples too? I remember the first time I read that, I thought, whoa, dude, hold the brakes. I mean, it's cool to be bold in your faith and stuff, but like, you're coming against, imagine you're going up against Donald Trump and all of the Senate. You're like, listen, guys, I know y'all have, PhDs and stuff, but I'm telling you, here's my opinion, right? That would be crazy. Well, that's what happened, right? That's his story. And what ended up happening after that is a revival, like, completely broke out, and people were transformed in the community forever, right? So that's awesome. So why does that matter, right? That's not my story. I'm not. Well, it's really important because his story is my story. His story is Charlie Kirk's story. Who knows about Charlie Kirk? Unless you've lived under a rock, right? Pretty intense stuff going on right now, right? So it could be your story too. The question is, what are you doing with your life while it's here? I can assure you that it's going to go by very quickly. For me, I'm here again, here to share my story. So I'll give you the quick cliff notes, right? I was born into a thunderstorm. 2 days before I was born, my mom left my dad while he was sleeping in the middle of the night. I'm old enough that we didn't have cell phones back then, so there was no way for him to know where she was. She bolted. She's days out from having his child, right? 2 days later, she comes to Alabama where her family is, does not tell my dad where she has left with me in her stomach, right? She has me. When I am born, typically, I don't know how many of you have had babies, but if you're like me, I also have not had a baby. So I had to learn a bit about what typically happens when you're born, when you have a baby. Well, typically, what happens is when you come spitting on out of your mama, then the nurses clean you up and give you straight to her so that you can do what they call skin-to-skin touch, right? She holds you, your skin's touching her skin. It's a beautiful moment. Wonderful. Well, when that happened for me, when I was born, my mom refused to touch me. My mom actually did not, in fact, touch me for the first 3 weeks of my life. So because she would not touch me and because my father wasn't there, they really weren't quite sure what to do, right? Because she still wanted to keep me. So typically, if a parent doesn't want anything to do with the child when they pop them out, right, it's because they don't want to keep them. So that's a good way to put it, right, guys? So anyways, they clean me up, swaddle me up, right, in my blankets, and cute little baby me, is just hanging out. And back then, they didn't have like the cool incubator stuff that probably all of you little baby bodies were in, right? So they just sat me next to her, so she wouldn't hold me, right? And didn't have a dad to hold me because he didn't even know where I was. And so it was kind of like this, right? But it was laying flat. They called it a chart tray. No edges or anything on it. It looked just like this, right? That the doctor would just kind of stick their chart on, whatever, there's paper. After they waddled me up in my blankets, and I was ready to go, and swab in my hat, they laid me on that and rolled it up next to her bed. Well, typically, just so you know, most babies, it's not normal or usual for babies to really do much movement when they're first born, right? They're certainly not gonna just top up and hang out, ask for snacks or roll around, right? That's not usual for a baby. So, but of course I'm quite unusual. And so, I actually started to roll towards my mother, and she just would not touch me, spoiler alert, she didn't touch me for the first few weeks of my life, so she's certainly not touching me that day. So when I rolled towards her, I rolled off of the chart tray and I smacked, the ground and landed with my face. That's why I have great cheekbones. Just kidding. But anyways, no broken bones, right? What a miracle. I literally, as a little baby, I'm swaddled up in, my outfit, whatever, my blanket. I don't even have hands free to catch my fall, right? So I'm just chilling with my face on the floor, my body like this, and so no broken bones, right? That's a miracle. Babies are pretty fragile, when they're first coming into this world. And so my mother was so terrified to touch me that she wouldn't even pick me up or intercept the fall, right? So she pushes her nurse button, and the nurses come in to get me because she didn't want them to think that she had put that mark on my face or that she had pushed me off the thing or whatever, So they picked me up, put me back on there, and then 7 hours after I was born, my dad ends up learning where we're at and ends up joining the picture. About a month after I was born, my mother and my father get a divorce. Never knew the man, never met my dad, keep rolling, right? And so the story goes on of my life, and pretty dysfunctional one. Certainly it's one of abandonment. I was literally born into rejection from my own mother, right? I didn't ask to be here, right? She did the deed, she got me here, she knew what she was doing, and so that's a pretty hard place to be in. Immediately starting out your life in rejection and abandonment, right? But I already was seeing miracles from the very first day of my life. Again, I smashed my face on the floor and there's no issue other than just a little redness on my cheeks for a few hours, right? And so, story goes on, and my mom married 7 husbands. We're going back to back to back as I'm in your age, I'm in school, right? And I go to 8 different schools by the time I'm in freshman in high school. And so it's hard, as some of the husbands have sons who decided whenever I'm sleeping in my room, they want to come in and take a look at their new sister. Real weird stuff, right? Pretty uncomfortable stuff. Right, I wasn't rejected, right? At least they want to take a look, just kidding. But, right, so uncomfortable upbringing, okay? So then, story keeps rolling, and my uncle, who truly was like the greatest part of my life. He was the first person, he was a Christian man, first person to show me what love looks like, first person to show me what Jesus looks like and who he is and what his love looks like. And so at the age of 8, I actually became a follower of Jesus. So all throughout all this dysfunction, with my uncle right there helping me along the way, the most consistent relationship I ever had was my relationship with the Lord. And so I always would see him, even in those uncomfortable moments, I would always see the Lord making his way through and getting me through it. And, I never saw myself come to something that he didn't bring me through. And so finally, when I become a high schooler, like a lot of you guys, we end up finally talking my mom into letting my uncle adopt me. And it was the greatest day of my life. I get to move in with him. All is good. Life is awesome. Taught me how to shoot a gun. Taught me shopping. We talked about Jesus. He was 6'7", this huge man that would wear chemo, and he was just amazing. And so then 8 months later, he died of a heart attack. And then I became homeless. I'm still in high school like you guys, but I had nowhere to go. And so I moved in with a boyfriend at the time that was in college, got myself through high school. And then after I graduated high school, went to college, went through life, did photo shoots for Sports Illustrated, sold cars, traveled all over the world, and would just find myself, getting into situations where people would just choose other people over me, And then I ended up finding myself back in Alabama. I meet my husband, and we get married, and part of his vows was, look, your whole life's been about survival, but now you're gonna get to live to just thrive, just live, in the abundance of the Lord, and I'm gonna take good care of you. But then 8 months later, he asked me for a divorce because he wanted to work on restoration of his first wife, who was the mother of his children, right? So as a child of divorce over and over and over again, of course I bowed out, so I can imagine how cool it would have been if my parents would have been so selfless and loved me so much that they worked past their differences and stayed together. I can't even fathom the power of that. And so we divorced, and they gave it a shot. Well, clearly that was him living in his will, right, instead of the Lord's will. But he had to see that for himself. This world is tricky, right? And so months later, I come back. My husband saw to his crazy senses, right? The Lord restored us, and our whole family dynamic has been so much better ever since, and that's been amazing. When I came back home to him, we had about a year of just bliss, and I was finally like, hallelujah, like, this is the life, no issues. And then, who remembers the year of 2020? What happened? COVID, right? It affected everyone. Yeah, the worst, right? Well, on top of COVID, I'm an overachiever when it comes to suffering, so I got cancer back then. So right at the beginning of March, whenever everybody learned about COVID and schools are shutting down, things are getting crazy, I get cancer. I get breast cancer, and it's all over the place inside of my body. And so we end up, they're locking me down. I'm doing the surgery. I'm having body parts removed. I'm having, chemo, losing the hair, going through all that. Then I have radiation, which is, if you don't know what radiation is, it's basically like a mutant superhero Marvel movie, but it's the villain side, where they fry you with actual laser beams from the outside in. And then you look like a burn victim. That's what radiation is, right? So I go through that. And then later on in that year, I beat it. Crushing life, doing great, opened up a few different businesses, have some factories where I'm creating, who knows, Lululemon, right? I'm doing things like that. I have my own workout line, clothing line. I got a boutique, crushing life. Well, then June of 2022 rolls around, and cancer comes back, and whenever they tell us to come in to talk about it, now it is terminal, and they say, look, we're really sorry, but we've missed it somehow, and it has completely taken over my liver. It was all up and down my spine. It was everywhere. And so they're like, look, we just don't know what else we could do. We're going to give you this treatment and give it a try if you're open to that. But as of right now, you need to close down the businesses and plan your funeral. You got 3 months left to live. We're thinking the last 2 of the 3, you're going to be bedridden on hospice. So while you've got your faculties and you can kind of understand what you're doing, go ahead and plan the funeral and close down the businesses. And so we did. We went on our last life trip to Italy. It was fabulous. We came back, planned my funeral, got the city of Guntersville to sign off that we were going to cremate me, y'all, and throw me in like 10,000 pounds of glitter and drop me out of our airplane over Lake Guntersville. And all y'all be swimming inside of Rebecca, right? It was going to be great. So we planned all that, and brings us to today. Now, like, they gave me 3 months back in June 2022. It's been 3 years. It's very much, I'm very much alive, right, still. I didn't die, and they thought I did. And in fact, not only am I alive and able to be here with you guys, the cancer's still very much inside of me. This week, we got a turn of some harder news. I've got a golf-sized tumor in my skull that is inches away from my brain, and then I've got another one on my pelvis, that's ripping apart that, right? Which is why they want me to have a stool, because they don't want me to fall and you guys have to come pick me up off the ground. So it's very much still here, right? But life moves on. Your life isn't your circumstances. So these last 3 years, when I was supposed to be dead, what they do when you're terminal, they give you 3 months left to live, they give you a death date. My death date was September the 1st of 2022. If you're still kicking and around, hanging in there on your death date, then you go in and you do a scan where they can see, okay, can't believe it, you're still around, let's see if anything changed, or if maybe we missed the date by like a couple days, right? So I go in, I get in the scan. When I'm on the scan, I start praying, we're playing worship music, I'm praying out loud in the scan, it's about 40 minutes, and then whenever I get off, I put my feet, on the ground, put my feet back in my shoes, right, to get off the bed, scan. Then immediately, something felt so different in my body. I'm not going to be one, I'm real skeptical about people that claim a bunch of stuff that are false witnesses, right? I never want to do that because Jesus is incredible on his own. We don't have to add anything to him. So I didn't know if I was healed then or not or what, but I just knew I felt different. And I was able, when I was getting on that scan machine, just to explain to you guys the difference, I couldn't walk myself to the scan machine at that point. My body literally was dying. I couldn't eat anymore. My skin had turned yellow because I lost function in my liver. I couldn't walk myself into the scan. I was still alive, technically, but they had to actually 2 guys that could carry me, lift me, and place me on the thing. So when I get up and I, put my feet back in my shoes myself, and I stand up and I'm like, guys, I can walk, I'm good. Clearly something's different. Didn't know what, but obviously my body is changing. And so then between that moment to now, what those scans showed is all the tumors had either shrunk or disappeared. And so, we had the scan from before, and then we had to scan 3 months later, and it took them actually about 3 weeks to finally come up with the final diagnosis because they thought maybe they made a mistake from the first scan or maybe they made a mistake with the second scan, but the 2 scans just didn't match, right? And that's another miracle. My life's been full of them. It's been full of suffering, but it's been full of miracles. And so now, 3 years later, I'm standing with all you cool cats, right, and telling you my story, and I have traveled the world. I am a 2-time best-selling author with Christian children's books. I've been touring the world, just got back from Israel and the Dominican Republic, sharing my story, right? That's pretty neat. But then I came back home to, guess what, it's back, it's ramped up and it's growing. So, what is the point of that, right? I think about the teenager and the boldness that he had in his faith and the purpose that he felt in his life. And I think about my life, I think about Charlie Kirk, and I think about the boldness that he had in his faith. We're seeing, even when, I was actually away whenever that happened, but even overseas, it polarized, Charlie Kirk's death has completely polarized the entire world. I'll tell you, I've been over there, I know. From my Australian friends, to my Israeli friends, to my Palestinian friends, to my South African friends, to my Mexican friends, to my Canadian friends, to my American friends, all over the world, everybody is completely, perhaps terrified, or it's lit a flame under them, right? We're seeing revivals popping up all over the place. And so, I remember when I first started my suffering tour, where I started going around and sharing my story. Several of my friends with me, we would have these epic moments, we share these stories, and then sometimes I have a little bit more time, so I go into extra detail of just how wild my suffering has been, and so they're wild stories. And so my friends would go, when I would ask them, well, hey, why don't you join me next time and share, your story, share what you've seen God do in your life, and they would always say, almost always, they will say, my story is not like yours. Like, I don't have all these miracles in my life. My story's kind of boring. Like, it's not like that. Like, that's worth hearing or sharing, But that means that you don't understand what you have. Because out of all the miracles in my life, including God healing me, right there on the chart, right? The greatest miracle that ever happened to me was whenever I was 8 years old and I encountered the living Jesus. I can assure you, if you are questioning if he's real or if it's another one of those myth things, a story, I've been to where he grew up. I've been to where I have touched where he was born. I have walked where he walked with the cross over his shoulder to die for your rotten selves and my rotten self, right? He didn't deserve any of that, and he did it for you. You were worth dying for. And as someone who has faced death myself, right, you really can't know what you're living for here until you really understand what you're dying for and what you're worth, what you think is worth dying for. What are you willing to bet your life on? Have you ever thought about that? Or are you just kind of coasting through this technological life? Perhaps you're on autopilot and you don't even really know what you're doing here anyways. What's the point, right, of life? What's your purpose? Do you know that? And it all starts with the one that created you. And I'll tell you, if you know Jesus, if you can truly honestly say that you have encountered the living God, the creator of the universe, then you have the most incredible miracle of a story to share with everyone. And in the scripture, he commands you to. So it would be, experiencing him and then not sharing what you experienced with others would be the same as you being out in a desert with just you and one other person, and you having a collection of water that you found that's cold and even has some ice. I've been to the desert in Egypt, by the way. There's no ice there, and there's no water there. So that would be like super epic. You find this treasure chest of ice water, right? And then you having more than enough for the two of you, and you choosing not to share that with them. And you watching what that means. You watching them, your friend, right, die from thirsting to death. All the while you could have shared, you had the water. Well, that's what Jesus is. He's the living water that if you know him, you have it. And if you don't share that out of whatever reason, because you might feel like you don't know how, or you might feel like I don't know enough of the scripture and the Bible to talk about. That teenager didn't know any scripture. He couldn't see. He was blind. He didn't read scripture. They didn't even have the Bible back then. They were living out the Bible. So he moved in the boldness of faith. He was willing to bet his life that Jesus was who he said he was. Because once he encountered him, he could see Jesus is the real deal. When Charlie Kirk encountered Jesus, he could see, I was blind, but now I can see. Old boy Charlie, okay, I had an opportunity to meet him, but it just didn't make sense. But we were in the same area overseas a couple of years ago. But his life has been one that's been quite influential, right? And so this guy is very similar to the guy in the story, the teenager, right? He has now, just out of his boldness of faith, he has acted in such a way that has gotten the attention of our actual Senate. Even Donald Trump, the president of the country, is calling him. He has the hotline for Trump, right, where he's calling Trump saying, hey, my Turning Point organization, I need you to come talk to these people. Can you do it? He's calling the president. The president's busy, right? He's got things to do. And he's making space for Charlie, for a believer, for a follower of Jesus, out of the pure fact that he's watched him be the real deal and just walk out his story, his testimony, right? Just shining the Lord, shining his love, and being bold in his faith. So, I'll close it there. If you know Jesus, I hope that you have enough understanding of him to share your faith and boldness. I'll tell you guys, in everybody's life, people that are the oldest in here, people that are middle, me, you guys the youngest, right? There's always some point in your life where you'll hear, like, the world's ending, I think the end of times is near. Well, I don't know that, right? Who knows that? Only the Lord. But what I can assure you, as I travel around this world, it's not a battle between two different sides of the spectrum of human beings. Guys, whether you're aware of it or not, I can assure you, you are in a spiritual war, in a spiritual battle right now against a supernatural camp of the enemy. And if I had to ask you, what is the name of the guy down in hell, what would you say his name is? Or maybe even yeah, okay? Those are not names. Who has ever heard of Jesus, God? You know, who's ever heard of them talked about like Yahweh? Have you heard that name, Yahweh? Have you heard of Jehovah Jireh? Have you heard of Jehovah Elroy? You know, have you heard of any of those words, right? Those are descriptor words. His name is Jesus, but those are descriptor names. Satan, devil, those are descriptor names. Whenever Jesus knocked old boy out of heaven and he was no more allowed, right? He blotted out his name in the book of life, period. So why will we be afraid, even of a whole camp, right, of demonic forces? Those are real. It's not to scare you, it's just to wake you up, right? So why will we be afraid of someone that doesn't even have a name? Right? You have a name. You have a birthright to the kingdom of heaven. You have authority. If you are a follower of Jesus, you have the authority to speak in Jesus' name. And just so you know, that Bible that you have here also tells you, promises you that if you are a follower of Jesus, you can tap into the same resurrection power that he tapped into that helped him rise from the grave, right, 3 days later. Okay, same power that I'm tapping into. I keep resurrecting over and over every time I almost die, right? So, what is the point? I think the point is, my prayer for you is, it's time now. Are you aware of Jesus? Do you know him? Are you following him? And if you're following him, are you able to tap into the boldness of sharing?
Hey, hey.